Man, do I love talking about the more obscure games out there. And I really like talking about the more unique ones, especially ones like this one that used to be much, much bigger than they were before. So today is just kind of like the perfect storm of games that I really like to bring up. Today we're going to be talking about one of the first Diceless role-playing games out there and a true representation of the explosion of RPGs from the 80s and early 90s. This game is Amber.
Life's tough.
When you're an NPC,
Life's rough.
when you depend on me,
To give you weapons, items, hardware, information for your journey, and still you just push it and try to hurt me. Life's tough.
when you're an NPC,
Life's rough.
If there was ever a time that symbolized role-playing games in the most intriguing stage, it was role-playing games that were released in the 1980s and into the early 90s. It was during this decade and a couple of years after that you could really characterize the role-playing game scene as the Wild West. A lot of people wanted a piece of the RPG pie, and considering the fact that at the time there was a lot open, it left a lot of creativity to emerge and different games to come out. We are currently going through our own little RPG renaissance, so to speak, and big boom. Considering the fact that now you have the digital option to publish, you have a lot of RPGs on the market. Tons in PDF form that you can purchase and buy for relatively nothing. Some as high as $60 and others as low as, well, free. But back in the 80s and early 90s, this was a different scene because you needed a publisher in order to get a lot of the stuff out. Most of the creative games that we see today are just left to the homebrew world. So, you had shelves upon shelves of different books and different games, all trying to carve out their little niche. And really, it was an amazing time because you didn't know what product you were going to get. The products ranged from amazing to horrendously terrible to just baffling. This was the era of AD&D. This was the era of the Star Wars RPG. It was the era that gave us leading-edge games, the birth of Shadowrun, Cyberpunk 2020, the prototypes that would become White Wolf Publishing. They ranged from amazing to creative to terrible to awful to unique. There was just a lot of new stuff out there in the consumer market, and everyone was looking to carve out their own tract of land, their own specialty. That's how you got a lot of the blistering turds out there, such as the games from Leading Edge, who tried to corner the market on mathematically sound gaming that really didn't work out well for anybody. But this was also during a time that people were looking at role-playing games and seeing what a role-playing game actually was, what were the mechanics of a role-playing game, and how could we bend them, twist them, metamorphosize them outside of what Dungeons & Dragons gave us. Hence the topic for today. Amber was a game released during the late 80s to early 90s and, like others, was looking to claim its own uniqueness and enjoyability in an attempt to capture the lightning-in-a-bottle effect that was D&D. What was their plan to go through all this? Well, their idea of interest fell into the concept of Diceless role-playing games. Diceless role-playing is an interesting concept. On the one hand, gamers in the 80s and 90s had a really hard time. Unless your game came with the uniquely shaped dice, you were kind of left out in the cold. All things considered, I mean, you had your D6s, but if you wanted to find your dodecahedron or your diamond or your triangle-shaped dice, I mean, you better hope you live next to a gaming store or that you knew of a convention, because you weren't finding them anywhere else. Beyond that, though, on the other hand, and kind of more towards my end, especially since I'm of the later generation of gamers, dice are the best part of a game. They're an essential part of role-playing games. There's something about just throwing those dice, rolling the bones, and seeing what comes up. Hitting your dice against the boards, just looking at the number and being like, yes, or God damn it. I mean, it's a unique aspect of the game. It's a quintessential aspect of the game is the dice, especially the uniquely shaped dice. So, it's like taking sauce away from a pasta dish, or it's like taking bases out of baseball, or, I don't know, giving a win to the Cleveland Browns. Can it be done? Yeah, theoretically, but if you do so, you kind of take away a quintessential aspect of the game itself, of the entity itself. No matter what side you take on this matter, it was worth noting that Amber was one of the first to truly challenge the fundamentals of what a role-playing game is. Amber did away with the concept of dice, adopting a system that was predominantly controlled through a series of additions and much more of a role-play heavy sort of game. The game is at least interesting and deserves points for uniqueness, especially since whenever that you're looking at it, this game is truly a time capsule to role-playing games of the past. We will dig into the Diceless mechanics in a second, which also adds to the pile of interesting. But first, I really want to tackle, well, everything else about this thing, because it really is something to behold. This book is the late 80s and early 90s to its core. You have a book that is filled to the brim with examples of play that are typed out like some sort of play script. It is dominated by cost-effective white paper that is only sometimes spruced up by some interesting choices of pencil and ink drawings without any color to it. And then there is the crown jewel, the cover. Just look at this thing. What the fuck is even going on here? What is this? The cover looks like some sort of weird amalgamation of an RPG and a Tool music video. Here's another thing that I love about the 80s and 90s RPG scene. Nobody knew what the fuck they wanted to do, so they decided to say, fuck it, and do all of them. We can even play Count the RPGs with this cover alone. You have some cyberpunk-looking dude with a gun who looks kind of like he's from the Wild West a little bit. You have some classic fantasy with the dragon fairy thing. You have some Chthonian monster in the background made of tentacles and an all-seeing eye. And then there is the woman in the front who looks like she was dreamed up by Cronenberg or something. A black set of armor combined with two freakish swords, another sword on her hip, and her hair turning into 6 all-seeing eyes that are staring straight into my fucking soul. And don't even get me started on the uncanny valley that this thing is. This thing took the uncanny valley into a back alley and beat it to death, skewered it with its 6 swords, and then consumed it by unhinging its jaw like the arachnid this woman is. At least D&D had the good grace to just give me a spaceship made out of a fucking pirate boat. Amber is over here giving me legitimate nightmares of someone's hair coming to life and consuming me in its tendrils. But that was it. That was the 80s and the 90s to a T. It was this amalgamation of ideas that had no refinement. It had no direction to it. But really, I'm not going to give this gigantic, statement that games today are so much better. What they lack in creativity, they have in homogenization, really. I mean, whenever it comes to the 80s and 90s, they had tons of ideas out there. They just put them all into one book without really any consideration of what that meant for tone or for who actually wanted a piece of the thing. So it was kind of like this giant holiday meal that you pile high. Does all of this food go together? Maybe, maybe not. You're going to worry about that after you're finished eating it. The game is weird, no doubt about that, but how did it play? What were the mechanics of the Diceless role-playing game? Amber splits character attributes into 4 sections: psyche, strength, endurance, and warfare. The game does have an odd sort of thing by having a character auction during character creation where players get to bid on various points, which definitely adds to the uniqueness and the strangeness of making characters, but certainly adds some friendly competition to the mix as well. You build your pool and then begin the game. Beyond that, the game is simply a who has the biggest number. A person with the higher score will win. However, the idea of the game is going into changing the rules of how the scoring works, gaining certain advantages to the person that has the lesser of the 2 scores. This can be done through role-playing or other mechanics built into the game. It is weird. It is so weird. Really, All of it is. It's such a unique and strange amalgamation of different ideas with a very simplistic system. The highest number wins, and if you're one of the lower numbers, you try to convince the DM and convince the world that the parameters have been changed by you, or look for other ways to change it. If not, you lose out. But oddly enough, it kind of works. This isn't necessarily a game that I'm going to reach for and play anytime soon. The thing is just too bizarre for me to personally enjoy. However, there are some definitely high qualities to it. The game does have a sense of imagination. Its system as well is at least admired for trying something different. I'm a kind of guy who likes to have his dice in his RPGs, but I can applaud a diceless RPG game that takes focus away from chance and puts it onto more of the role-playing of your character. I struggled with this one, deciding on which one I wanted to really go with. At the end of the day, I decided to give this a crit. Ultimately, the uniqueness kind of won out over the bizarreness, and I can definitely give points to trying something that's out of the box. So, this one just barely gets a crit. Thank you so much for watching, and please like and subscribe for more.